Margaret Calloway had one rule she never broke. She had built Calloway Industries from a single hardware store in Thunder Bay into one of the largest construction supply companies in Canada. And in 32 years of doing business, she had never once made a major decision based on instinct alone. Everything went through a process. Every candidate was vetted. Every number was verified twice. But the rule she was thinking about now had nothing to do with business. It was simpler than that, and far harder to explain. She had said it once to her late husband, Gerald, on a rainy Tuesday in 1998, and he had laughed and told her she was impossible. She had never disagreed with him. "Show me what someone does when no one is watching," she had told him, "and I'll tell you everything you need to know about them." Gerald had been gone for 11 years. The business was still here. And Margaret, at 61, was finally doing what her lawyers had been asking her to do for the better part of a decade. She was choosing a successor. The boardroom on the 14th floor of the Calloway Tower in downtown Toronto overlooked the lake on one side and the sprawl of the financial district on the other. On a clear October morning when the maples along the waterfront had gone full amber and the sky was that particular shade of blue that only happens in the fall, it was the kind of view that made people stop talking mid-sentence. Margaret had stopped noticing it years ago. She was standing at the head of the long oak table, 4 folders in front of her, 4 people seated along the right side. Her assistant, Claire, stood near the window with a tablet. Her chief legal officer, Robert Huang, sat at the far end, quiet as always, watching. The 4 people at the table did not know each other well. They had been selected from different branches of the company, different departments, different cities. They had only one thing in common. They were all being considered to run Calloway Industries when Margaret stepped back. She looked at each of them in turn. There was Patrick Brennan, 44, VP of Operations out of Calgary. Sharp dresser, sharper talker. He had doubled efficiency in the Western Division in 3 years and made sure everyone in the room knew it. Next to him sat Diane Whitmore, 39, head of strategic partnerships in Vancouver. Diane had a way of smiling that made you feel she already knew what you were going to say before you said it. She had brought in 4 major contracts in 18 months. She wore that fact the way Patrick wore his suits. Beside Diane sat Oliver Chen, 47, Director of Finance in Ottawa. Quiet, precise, the kind of man who caught errors no one else saw. He was good at his job and he knew it, but he kept the knowing to himself, mostly. And then there was the 4th person. Marcus Webb, 38, Regional Manager for Northern Ontario, Sudbury, specifically. He had taken on the role 4 years ago after the previous manager had left abruptly, and he had held that territory together through 2 supply chain crises and a brutal winter that had shut down half his team's projects for 6 weeks. He had done it without asking head office for anything extra, which was either a sign of competence or stubbornness, depending on who you asked. He was the only one at the table not wearing a suit. He had on a pressed dark green shirt, clean trousers, good boots. He looked like a man who had made an effort without having been told what the effort was supposed to look like. His hands were folded on the table. He was watching Margaret with a particular kind of attention. Not the attention of someone performing alertness, but the attention of someone who genuinely did not want to miss anything. Margaret had noticed that before she noticed anything else about him. She placed a hand on the 4 folders. "I'm not going to make a speech," she said. "You all know why you're here. You've all been evaluated on your work, your numbers, your leadership. But I've learned in 30 years that numbers tell you what someone has done." She slid the folders down the table, 1 to each person. Inside each folder was a single card. Matte black, embossed with the Calloway Industries logo, and below it in simple text, "Approved. No limit. This is a company card," she said. "It is, for the purposes of this exercise, unlimited. Claire has already spoken with our legal and finance teams. There are no personal liability implications. There are no categories. There is no approval process. The card works." Patrick picked his up immediately, turned it over, and looked up at her. "What's the purpose of the exercise?" "Use it," Margaret said. "You have 3 weeks. Use the card however you choose. At the end of 3 weeks, we'll meet again and review what was purchased. That review will be part of my succession assessment." There was a pause in the room. "Whatever we want?" Diane asked. "Whatever you want," Margaret said. Oliver said nothing. He looked at the card, set it down precisely parallel to the edge of the folder, and folded his hands. Marcus turned the card over once. Then he looked up at Margaret, and for a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that she couldn't quite name. Not excitement, not calculation. Something more like recognition, as though the exercise meant something to him that it didn't mean to the others. Then he closed his folder and set it on the table. 3 weeks, Margaret said. Beginning today. She expected the spending to begin quickly. She had not expected how quickly. Patrick's first transaction came through before noon. A flight to Whistler booked for that weekend. Business class. A chalet rental that cost more per night than most people spent on groceries in a month. Robert had set up a tracking system that fed directly to his tablet, and he sent Margaret a summary each evening without comment. By Friday, Patrick had added to his tab a tailor-made suit from a shop on King Street, a dinner for 12 at a restaurant that had a 6-month wait list, and something described in the receipt as private automotive experience, which turned out to be a supercar track day north of the city. Diane's approach was more strategic, which Margaret had expected. She spent the first few days buying nothing at all. Then, in the second week, she used the card to fly 3 potential business partners from Calgary to Toronto, put them up at the Shangri-La, and took them to dinner. She sent Margaret a brief email explaining that she had identified an opportunity to advance 2 stalled partnership negotiations and had used the card to accelerate the timeline. It was, Margaret thought, a clever answer. Use company resources to create company value. Make the test work for you. Oliver predictably spent the least. A new laptop. A pair of ergonomic chairs for his home office. A subscription to a professional database he had apparently been requesting through the budget process for 2 years and had never been approved for. His spending had the careful, slightly vindicated quality of a man finally being allowed to buy the things he had always been told the budget didn't have room for. And then there was Marcus. His first transaction was on a Wednesday, 3 days into the exercise. It was a grocery run, a large one, over $400 at a store in Sudbury. Margaret looked at the receipt summary and thought there must have been an error. She asked Claire to pull the itemized breakdown. It was not an error. He had bought flour, sugar, canned goods, rice, cooking oil, formula, diapers, winter boots in children's sizes. He had bought boxes of crackers, fruit cups, instant oatmeal, jars of peanut butter. He had bought a case of laundry detergent and a box of Ziploc bags. It looked, Margaret thought, like someone stocking a pantry for a very large family in a very cold place. She did not say anything to anyone. She waited. The second transaction came the following Monday. It was from a building supply catalog, Calloway's own catalog, which meant Marcus had used the card to purchase Calloway products. That alone was unusual enough to make her read the order twice. He had ordered insulation panels, weather stripping, caulking material, and pipe wrap. The delivery address was in Sudbury, but it was not his office and it was not his home. Margaret searched the address. It came back as a community support center on the east side of the city. She set down her coffee and read the summary again. The week after that, Marcus used the card at a local sporting goods store. Children's winter jackets, sizes 4 through 12, snow pants, mittens, wool socks. He spent nearly $2,000. Then he used it at a pharmacy. Vitamins, cold medicine, first aid kits, blood pressure monitors, then at a print shop for materials she couldn't identify from the receipt alone. The description said, educational resource packages, quantity 40. By the end of the second week, Marcus had spent approximately $14,000 total. Every dollar of it in Sudbury, every dollar of it on other people. Patrick, by contrast, had crossed $90,000. Diane had reached $62,000, though she would argue with good reason that hers was a business investment. Oliver sat at just under $8,000, careful as ever. Margaret did not share the summaries with anyone. She read them alone in her office, at the end of each day. On the Thursday of the third week, she got in her car and drove to Sudbury herself. She did not tell anyone she was going. She told Claire she would be working remotely for 2 days and left it at that. Sudbury in late October is not a gentle place. The Canadian Shield breaks through the earth in great gray slabs, and the boreal forest crowds against the edges of the city, like it's waiting to take back what was borrowed. The sky sits lower here, or it feels that way, and the wind off the lakes in the morning has an edge to it that reminds you winter doesn't negotiate. Margaret had grown up in Thunder Bay. She recognized the feeling of a northern city, the particular combination of resilience and tiredness that comes from living somewhere beautiful and unforgiving all your life. She found the community center without difficulty. It was a low-slung brick building on a side street, the kind of place that had probably been there since the 70s and had been painted and repainted and kept going by sheer collective stubbornness. There was a hand-painted banner above the door. Northern Families Resource Center. Everyone welcome. She parked across the street and sat in her car for a moment. Through the windows of the center, she could see movement. People coming and going. A woman behind a front desk. A small child running past one of the windows. On the front step, two teenage boys were loading boxes out of a van, hauling them inside with the exaggerated casualness of teenagers pretending physical effort is beneath them. She got out and walked over. The woman at the front desk was somewhere in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of someone who had been answering questions all day and had made peace with it. "Her name tag," said Dorothy. "Hi there," Dorothy said. "Are you here for the drop-in or picking up a package?" "Neither," Margaret said. "I'm looking for Marcus Webb." Dorothy looked at her for a moment with the particular alertness of a person deciding whether to be helpful or cautious. "Is he expecting you?" "No," Margaret said. Dorothy seemed to conclude from something in Margaret's face or bearing or the fact that she was wearing a coat that probably cost more than Dorothy's monthly groceries that this was worth pursuing. She picked up a phone. "I'll see if he's out back." He was. He came in through a side door carrying a cardboard box, and when he saw Margaret standing in the lobby, he stopped walking, just for a beat. Then he kept coming. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "Marcus," she said. He set the box down on a nearby table. It was full of the insulation panels she had seen in the supply order. He was wearing work gloves. There was a smudge of something on his forearm that might have been caulking compound. "How did you know I was here?" he asked. "I followed the receipts," she said. He nodded slowly, like this was a reasonable thing to say. "I should have thought of that. Walk me through it," she said. She gestured at the building around them. Marcus looked around for a moment as though deciding where to start. Then he pulled off his work gloves and tucked them in his back pocket and said, "You want the full version or the short version?" "The full version." He was quiet for a moment, not gathering himself exactly, more like choosing the beginning. "There are about 40 families in this part of Sudbury," he said, "that I know personally or know of who are having a hard time right now. Some of them are families with kids where one parent left or passed. Some are new to Canada and haven't landed work yet. Some are seniors living alone. Most of them, before last month, couldn't afford to heat their apartments through the whole winter." He said it the way people say things that are hard and true. Matter-of-factly, without drama, but with a weight behind it that made sure you understood. "When you gave us the card," he continued, "the first thing I thought was, I could use this on myself. I could use it for something I've been putting off. I had a list, actually." He said that last part with a small, slightly self-deprecating sound, not quite a laugh. "I've been driving the same truck for 9 years. I was going to get a new one. What stopped you?" Margaret asked. He was quiet again, and then he said, "My daughter." Margaret waited. "Her name is Rosie," he said. "She's 7. Her mother passed when Rosie was 2, so it's been the two of us for a while now." He said it with the practiced brevity of a man who had answered the question many times and had learned to say the essential truth quickly to save the other person the awkwardness of responding to the whole weight of it. "Last winter, we had a family in our neighborhood, single mom, 3 kids. Their heating unit failed in January. It was -30 outside. Rosie found out because her classmate came to school in shoes that had holes in them." He paused. "Rosie is 7, he said again. "And she came home and asked me why I had holes in her shoes in January, and I didn't have a great answer. So we went out the next weekend and bought Amara new boots, together. Rosie picked them out." Margaret said nothing. "It wasn't a big thing," Marcus said. "But Rosie talked about it for weeks. Like it was the most important thing we had done all year. More important than her birthday," she said. He shook his head slightly. "She's 7. She doesn't really understand yet what money is or isn't, but she understood something happened when we gave Amara those boots. She understood it mattered." Margaret looked at the box of insulation panels. At the stack of children's jackets she could see through the open door of a back room. At the printed resource packages piled on a shelf, colored paper and stapled corners. "When you gave us the card," Marcus said, "I thought about what Rosie would say if I told her I spent the money on a new truck. And then I thought about Amara's shoes. And then I thought about 40 families going into a Sudbury winter with inadequate insulation in their walls." He paused. "It wasn't a hard decision." Said, "No one told you to do this." "No," he said. "No one's told me." She looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze without flinching, but without performance either. Just a man who had done something and was comfortable with having done it and didn't need her to confirm that it was right. "The insulation," she said. "You're installing it yourself?" "Me and a couple of the guys from the office who volunteered their weekend," he said. "We did 4 apartments last Saturday. 3 more this weekend. That's not in the receipts." "No," he said. "That part didn't cost anything. She stayed for 3 hours. She helped Dorothy unpack a shipment of canned goods and listened to her talk about the center and the families it served and the particular challenge of a northern city where the winters were long and the services were thin and the people were proud and sometimes needed to be convinced that accepting help was not the same as asking for it. She sat in a small where a volunteer ran an after-school tutoring program and watched 3 kids, 2 of them Rosie's age, 1 older, work through math problems at a folding table. One of the younger ones had a Callaway Industries pencil case. Margaret recognized the logo. She had approved that promotion 3 years ago. She wondered if Marcus had brought those too. She met Rosie briefly. When Marcus's mother dropped her off after school, Rosie was small and serious-faced, with a blue toque pulled low over her forehead and an air of someone arriving to conduct business. She walked in, surveyed the room, spotted her father, and walked over and put her hand in his with the easy certainty of a child who has never once doubted she would be received. She looked up at Margaret with frank curiosity. "Are you the lady from the card?" Margaret looked at Marcus. "I told her I had a card that could help people," he said. "Kids ask where things come from. I'm the lady who gave your dad the card," Margaret said. Rosie considered this. Was it a test? Margaret blinked. Marcus made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "We talked about that," he told Margaret. "She asked me if it was a test when I explained what I was doing. I told her I wasn't sure. It was a little bit of a test," Margaret said to Rosie. Rosie appeared satisfied with this answer. "Did he pass?" "I think so," Margaret said. Rosie nodded once, the matter resolved, and went to take off her boots. The final meeting was on a Tuesday morning in November, back in the boardroom on the 14th floor, the lake outside gone gray-green under a low sky. The same 4 people, the same chairs, Robert Huang at the end with his tablet. Margaret had the spending summaries in front of her, but she did not look at them. She told them what she had done. She told them she had reviewed each summary carefully. She told them there was no single right answer to the exercise. It had not been designed to have one. It had been designed to show her something. Patrick talked about the business value of network building and personal investment. He had some things he wanted to say, and he said them well. He was very good at saying things well. Diane explained, clearly and cogently, how her spending had advanced 2 genuine business relationships and might yield results in the next fiscal year. She had done the math. It was not wrong math. Oliver said he had used the funds for productivity improvements and was prepared to provide documentation of the efficiency gains. Marcus said nothing until Margaret looked at him. "I spent the money on people who needed it," he said. "That's the whole story." There was a quality of quiet in the room after that. Patrick said, that's admirable, but we're talking about a succession decision for a major company. You need someone who understands that business resources need to produce returns. Returns for whom?" Marcus said. It was a genuine question, not a challenge. Patrick opened his mouth and closed it. "I'm not saying you're wrong," Marcus said. "I'm asking the question seriously. Returns for the shareholders. Returns for the communities where we operate. Those aren't always the same thing, and whoever runs this company is going to have to decide what the answer is. I made my decision with the card. I wanted to be clear about what the decision was." He looked at Margaret. "I know I probably didn't play the game the right way," he said. "I know what the exercise probably looks like from the outside. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know it wasn't accidental. It wasn't because I didn't think about it. I thought about it a lot." Margaret nodded once. "I know you did," she said. She made the decision that evening. She sat in her office as the city went dark outside the windows and the lake disappeared into the blackness, and the lights came on in the buildings across the way, and she thought about Gerald, who had laughed at her rule and never disagreed with her, and she thought about a 7-year-old girl in a blue toque who had asked if the test was passed. She thought about 40 families in Sudbury with warm walls going into a northern winter, and a man who had used a company card to buy peanut butter and children's mittens and educational packages in quantities of 40, and had then volunteered his weekend to install insulation. She thought about returns for whom. She thought about what it meant to run a company, really run one. Not just the numbers and the strategy and the quarterly calls, but the question underneath all of it, the one Gerald used to say most people in business never actually asked. What is this for? She knew when she had set up the exercise that there was no right answer. That was true. But she had also known, without being able to explain it to Robert or to Claire or to anyone who would have asked her to justify it with data, that there would be a moment when she saw it, when she understood which person in the room with an unlimited resource and no one watching had chosen to become the person she wanted running her company. She had seen it, Not in the boardroom. In a low-slung brick building on a side street in Sudbury, in the answer a 7-year-old gave without hesitating. She called Marcus the next morning. He answered on the second ring, which she had expected. He had the quality of a man who doesn't let calls go to voicemail when he can help it. "Marcus," she said. "Miss Calloway," he said. "I have a question before I say what I'm calling to say." A pause. "All right, the print shop receipt," she said. 40 educational resource packages. What were those? He was quiet for a moment. "Financial literacy materials," he said. "For the families. A lot of them are dealing with debt or don't understand how the credit system works or got taken advantage of by payday lenders. I found a curriculum developed at Laurentian. I had it printed and organized into packages, one for each family." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "I'm calling," she said, "to offer you the position." There was a silence on the line, not a surprised silence, exactly, more the silence of someone receiving news they had half prepared themselves not to receive and needing a moment to adjust to the fact that it had arrived. "I want to ask you something first," Marcus said. "Go ahead, the other 3 people," he said. "They're good at their jobs. I know Patrick's reputation. I know what Diane built in Vancouver. I don't want to be the reason anyone loses something they worked for." Margaret had expected this. She had prepared for it. "Patrick is being offered a senior advisory role," she said. "Diane is being asked to head a new partnerships division. Oliver will continue as CFO with an expanded mandate. No one is losing anything." Another pause. "You thought about this already." "I thought about it before the exercise ended," she said. "I wanted to be ready." She could hear something on his end, background noise, something indistinct. She thought she heard, very faintly, the sound of a child. "Rosie is home today?" she asked. "School holiday," he said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "Tell her she was right," Margaret said. "About the test. A beat. I'll tell her," he said. Margaret retired 18 months later, on a Thursday in April when the ice was finally off Lake Superior and the light had come back to the north, and it felt, as it always did at that time of year, like something that had been held still for a long time was beginning to move again. On her last day in the office, her assistant Claire brought in a package that had arrived by courier from Sudbury. Inside was a small wooden plaque, the kind made by a local craftsperson. Simple, unfinished pine. The kind you might see at a farmer's market or a school fundraiser. It had been engraved by hand. 8 words. "You showed me what the card was for." Below it was a small photograph taped to the back of the envelope. A man and a child in work gloves standing in front of a freshly insulated wall in a Sudbury apartment. The child was grinning with the specific abandon of someone who has just done something that mattered and knows it. Margaret set the plaque on her windowsill where it stayed until the movers came. She read it twice before she put her coat on. Then she turned off the lights and went home.